Hi, and welcome to another Design Diary. I'm Sarah Shira. I design under the name Imagine Landscapes Designs, and I'm super excited to talk about this hat. This hat is almost a year in the making. This is Brimmish, and Brimmish is, well, it's not just one hat. And you'll notice I'm not wearing it because I've got the newborn sample hats here. I actually gave all the adult size ones away, which gets me back to why this hat pattern is about a year old. I make a lot of knitted Christmas gifts for my family and friends, and I decided I wanted to have one go-to pattern for worsted weight. And so I wanted this to be sort of a hat pattern to end all hat patterns, at least for worsted for me. It is a really great weight of yarn for where I live. Worsted weight hats are also fast, and a lot of my absolute favorite yarns are worsted. They're just so luscious, and they take the color so beautifully, and they're plump enough to show the hand-dyed color. Ooh, they're just lovely. So last Christmas, I designed a hat pattern where I would have one hat pattern with lots of options, and people wouldn't know I was basically knitting the same thing over and over again, and it would feel really special. So I gave all those away. Wrote everything down, took some photographs at Christmas last year, and then sort of sat on it while we moved house and then renovated the new house, and now I'm ready to share it with everybody. So what do you get? You basically get 96 hats out of this pattern. Brimmish is, well, I wanted to go with brimming, but brimming is a name that is already well used, so I went with Brimmish, my own word. I invented it. So I designed a hat that has 6 different brim ribbings that are all use a stitch count that is a multiple of 6, although technically one rib is a multiple of 2, but it works. Obviously is also a multiple of 6. So you get 6 different brims. There are 8 sizes: newborn, baby, toddler, ages 3 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, then adult small, adult medium, adult large. That's 8 sizes. And then I also said, well, some people like beanie hats and some people like slouchies. So I've got 2 lengths. So 8 times 6 is 48. Times 2 lengths is 96. But if you consider that I also did the math for whether you want the yardage for a 2-color version where the brim is a contrast color, or if you want to knit the whole thing in a solid yarn. So if you consider adding solids versus 2-color hats, it's actually something like 192 hats you could knit without ever repeating the same hat exactly twice. That's a lot. That's Brimmish. So let's talk a little bit about the different brims, because really that's the meat of this. Although I have to say, I'm super pleased with this beautifully rounded, perfect little 6-pointed decrease. It just is like, ooh, so perfect. I love, if I'm gonna wear a beanie length, like a snug beanie, I like it to be like perfectly head shaped, perfectly smooth and lovely. I don't mind slouchies being rumply, but if you do this slouchy, it will also be nice and smooth shaped. So yeah, the decrease is pretty awesome, but let's be honest, we're here for the brims. So let's talk. I am not gonna do that thing where we like worry about trying to get it right on camera. I'm gonna take some beautiful beauty shots and we're gonna overlay those, and that's how you're gonna learn about the different brims. Visually, I'm gonna keep talking. All right, let's do the simple thing. A 1x1 rib. It's not the world's most breathtakingly innovative thing, but let's face it, we all know people who will wear nothing but knitted brims, or we might be knitting for charity, or for someone we're not super sure about, or we just don't want to think too much, and a 1x1 brim, really gonna do that. So that's kind of like the easy peasy one. So that's the 1x1 rib. Then let's talk about the little hourglass rib. The little hourglass rib has this really neat alternating normal rib with a rib that flares in and out. You do a really cool innovative stitch. You knit 2 together through the back loop, and then you do it again through the front loop. So you're not actually decreasing, you're just kind of grabbing those stitches and binding them together, and then you do a yarn over, and then you knit it two together. So the stitch count actually changes on this one for 2 of the rows. Well, for 1 row it's bigger, and then you fix it right on the next row. But it has this wonderful alternating straight linear look, and then this lovely hourglassing kind of beaded look. It's quite fantastic. So that's little hourglass rib. The modified sailor's rib, I found this in a Barbara Walker stitch dictionary, but I wanted it to be 6 stitches wide because 6 stitches is the multiple for this hat, and so I modified it a little bit. There is a twisted stitch rib down the kind of the core of it, and then there's alternating stockinette and reverse stockinette, almost like bricks. It is a really unusual pattern, and because of the way it kind of interacts, you can get a little bit of a scalloping. If you want to knit this for a guy and you're really worried about that little bit of a scallop, you could flip the rows so that the reverse stockinette is lowest. I don't think it would do that little bit of scallop the way it's doing here, but I'm not positive. Don't hold me to that. But I'd love to see your swatch. And if you do, please tell me about it. I haven't yet tried that version out. Then there's Stansfield number 10, which I feel like is a super mysterious name. I've also seen, I think, Stansfield number 8 in the same stitch dictionary that I found this, but where are the other Stansfield? And who was Stansfield? Or where was Stansfield? It is a really fantastic rib-based waffle stitch. It's got this really great alternating thick and thin with these little garter ridges. Just really pops fabulously, and I think it's just a really attractive hat. Then let's do the embossed moss stitch rib. It is a wider rib with a little bit of alternating moss stitches going down the broad column. It is an attractive hat with just a little bit of visual interest there. Depending on your yarn, those moss stitches are going to pop more or less. And then the last brim option, and the one that most of my test knitters really wanted to be the one to do, was the broad spiral rib. And the broad spiral rib is a faux cable. You're not actually cabling anything. You're doing right twists, which is that cunning little stitch where you knit 2 together. You don't take it off the needle. You put your needle tip through the very first one again, knit that one. So you still have 2 stitches, but what you've done is you've kind of pushed the order of them so they want to slant right. And you stack those in a particular way. It almost doesn't seem, when you look at what you're doing, when I look at the chart of the broad spiral, it doesn't seem that 1 in the middle and 2 above that could create the column of incredible carved cabliness that this does, and yet it does. Kind of a miracle. So those are the ones. Now before I blocked them, I did a little video where I talk about the different stitch patterns and how they affect gauge a little bit. Most of these, I recommend that you knit on the same needle size, but I recommend that the modified sailor's rib be knit not 1 size smaller, but 2 sizes smaller. So, and I also talk a little bit about the difference in the stitch patterns, and rather than talking anymore, I'm just gonna play that video now. Before I block these, I just want to point out a couple things. So here are all 6 of our brim options before blocking, and these are all the newborn sizes. So for the sample pictures, I did one just in the newborn sizes. So these were all knit on the same needle size for the body of the hat. I recommend that this is modified sailor's rib, be knit 2 sizes down the brim rather than the body. Usually on a hat, we knit the body on a larger size than the brim because we want a little extra negative ease around the ears. It just keeps the weight of the hat, the whole thing just from sort of whoosh, slipping off the back of our heads and being annoying. So here, all of these other ones, we went down 1 needle size, but for the modified sailor's rib, because of the way these extra purl sections really want to push the fabric apart, I recommend going down 2 needle sizes. I almost could say the same thing for the Stansfield number 10, but it wasn't as extreme, and so I thought it would be fine. If you really like a very snug brim though, I would go down on the Stansfield number 10. Before blocking, things don't look as good or as sharp. You'll notice that the little hourglass is just not popping as much. when it's just sort of lying there. But that's why we block things. It gets the stitches settled and it lets things relax and do its job. But the main thing I want to point out is that these 6 hats almost act as a mini tutorial in how stitch choices affect gauge. Even though I'm using the same yarn and for the most part the exact same needle sizes, excluding this one, we're getting a really big variation in gauge, partly because of the nature of how much ribbing and the ratio of ribbing. So a 1-to-1 pulls in at a certain rate, whereas this one pulls in at a different rate. This one's also ribbing based, so it's doing a thing. But what I really wanted to talk about is the difference between the broad spiral rib and the other patterns. The broad spiral rib is not actually a cable, it just looks like a cable. But because you have taken those 2 stitches and put them together, when you knit 2 together, in that moment, this tightens this up in a way that none of these other stitches get quite as tight as that little knit 2 together. Although we do have the twisted stitch pop here in the modified sailor's rib, and the little hourglass has its funky little tightening stitch at the bottom of the hourglass as well. But you'll notice that none of them are as narrow as this one. So it's something to think about. It's kind of really interesting to watch the same yarn play out so differently, and it's just about the stitch choice. So when we designers talk about how important it is to swatch, this is part of the reason why. Every yarn behaves a little differently, every stitch pattern behaves a little differently, and what it looks like now is going to look like it's going to be a little different once I've got it blocked. So you have to measure and know what your swatch looks like when it's pre-wash and then what it looks like afterwards. Because let's say you're knitting a sweater and you get partway through and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, it's way too small, it's not going to work. Well, if you didn't kind of pay attention to the difference between your washed swatch and your unwashed swatch, you might really freak out. But all that to say, it's really interesting to watch different stitches play out. If you don't like narrow brims or narrow hats, you might want to knit the broad spiral rib one needle size up, although I don't think you would. Most people like their hats to stick on in a particular way. But have a look at the difference between the Stansfield number 10 and that broad spiral rib. That's a really big difference, isn't it? So if you want to hear more about patterns like this or to get exclusive coupon deals, I encourage you to go down into the description box and click on the sign up link. If you give me your email, I will send you a newsletter about twice a month. Absolutely no spam, only awesome knitting content. I give the newsletter subscribers sneak peeks, advances. I let them vote on pattern names. They also get the best coupon deals of the year. And if knitting's your jam, the newsletter might be something that you're interested in. Otherwise, click like or subscribe or both. It might be a big day. Hope you have a great time and happy knitting.